Hey, good morning, everybody. Thanks. I thought that it would be kind of fun to have a discussion about JSON 5 and using the services. So uh, what would be great is that I've got a few people here to help the discussion. We've all had some good experiences and some challenging experiences. So I want to introduce MegaZone from F5. Hello. And Martin
Hello.
Prpic from Red Hat, and Vishal is my partner in crime here at Microsoft. But in addition to that, anybody can raise their hand and jump in anytime. We have a few stories that we want to tell ourselves, but if you feel like chiming in, please do so. So why don't we kind of go around real quickly and talk about who we are. So MegaZone, over to you.
Okay. Hi, I'm MegaZone, or just MD. I'm a principal security engineer on the F5 Server Security Incident Response Team at F5 Incorporated. I guess that's who I am.
And Martin, what do you do at Red Hat?
Hey, I'm a principal software engineer at Red Hat. I work on the product security dev team, which is a small subset of the entire product security team at Red Hat, specifically focused on writing the tools and services that underlie our security data publishing.
Cool. Hey, Vishal. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Hi everyone, I'm Vishal. I work at Microsoft Security Response Center with Lisa Olson and primarily focus on automating the vulnerability management infrastructure at Microsoft.
I'm Lisa Olson. I've been working in the MSRC for about 10 years, focused on publishing CVEs to the world, and we continually do that. It seems to be more and more every single month. So I've published a lot of CVEs in my tenure here. So Martin, tell us a little bit about some of the experiences you've had.
Yeah, so we started onboarding onto CVE JSON 5 sometime early this year, and our specific challenge was just the scale of data. Red Hat has historically been a CNA that covered a lot of CVEs for open source projects. Now, some of those projects are their own CNAs, but historically we just have a lot of CVE records that we maintain. And so migrating to CVE v5 presented a couple of challenges where we had to map our older historical data onto the new format. And then once we wrote the tools to do this, because it's at our scale of thousands and thousands of CVEs, it's impossible to hand edit every single record and publish it in the set format. So we have custom tooling to do this for us. And once we launched the first version, it actually started updating thousands and thousands of records, which caused the entire service to crumble because it produced way too many error reports. So I'm sure the folks at MITRE were very happy about that one. But we, in the end, solved it, resolved a couple of issues here and there, and I think overall we improved the. I see Dave laughing. Yeah, he can probably speak not very highly about this incident. But in the end, we got it solved out, and I think our publishing is pretty solid and uses the existing schema to publish way more data than it even used to before we onboarded onto the new spec.
Yes, that was a big lessons learned. We all learned about that, and some of the things that we're trying to do as a result of that, and everybody's experiences, is kind of share best practices around the whole group. And one place that people can do that is the Slack channel. There is a Slack channel that's sort of dedicated to helping each other out, and I've seen all of us in there at one point or another. It is a great place to find out where other people's experiences are. I don't know exactly how you get on that Slack channel, but somebody does. MegaZone, tell us a story.
Okay. Well, I guess some people are aware. I'm actually part of the working groups. I'm on both the automation working group and the quality working group. So I've been involved with some of the JSON 5 work and the automation work, the rollout of services. So kind of aware of the work going into things before we actually deployed the services. So we were looking at things at F5 in anticipation of that becoming available. And so as that became available, we hadn't really been doing a lot of automation with 4, and knowing 5 was coming, we had plans to do automation, but we were like, well, what's the point of starting to work on tools for doing anything with 4 when 5 is coming and services are coming and all. So we were basically holding off. So we've done a lot of work internally, developing tooling, moving away from a lot of what we had manual processes to manage our vulnerabilities and our disclosure processes. We're developing a lot of in-house tooling now. We actually have tooling we've been using for the past year since we've deployed services, deployed, to help automate our processes. And it's made a lot of improvements in our process internally. Certainly taking a lot of stuff off my plate. I was the guy doing most of the manual work, tracking everything in basically spreadsheets and stuff internally, and doing a lot of manual generation of the CVE records and things to be published. So now we have a lot of tools, just creating JSON, being able to really easily publish that out to CVE services. It makes life a lot easier as a CNA, and it adds a lot of really nice process flow to things. So I personally really like it because it makes my life a lot easier to have these APIs to work with. Makes it a lot easier to get CVE records, just get number assignments and things, right? Instead of having to say, give me a block of numbers and then manage it and everything. Just, we can real time, or we're building out to our tools just to say, we have a disclosure coming up, hit a button, assign CVEs. Just call the API and have it do it for you. And so it makes life a lot easier.
Yeah, that's for sure, because we used to manage our CVE IDs in a spreadsheet where we'd go to the spreadsheet, we'd type in the case number, and then we'd say who we were that got it,
Exactly how we did it.
Yeah, the IDR, we have a funny story about IDR, Vishal. Why don't you tell that one?
Sure. So as we are talking about the CVE idea, I will start with that. So once we had this roadblock when our automation pipeline, which was handling the CVE idea services and getting the CVE IDs back, was not able to update those CVE IDs to our system. And we were thinking there was some issue probably with the end-to-end pipeline, or probably we are not getting back the CVE IDs from the CVE idea. But after some investigation, since we report that action simultaneously a couple of times, we realized the calls to the CVE idea was successful. And indeed, we were getting back the CVE IDs, but there was some failure in the automation to be updating that CVE IDs to our system back. And that time we realized there were many CVE IDs generated, which might have gone unused if we would have not got that early. So there was some learning from our end, and we did think of having some kind of feature where it could self what's that called? But it freeze the CVE IDs if it's not going to be used. But that's something would be really helpful in those scenarios.
We had a pool of 800 CVEs that we didn't know we had. We finally found them, and we've been using them ever since. But I'm not sure we'll use them all before the end of the year.
And on the JSON 5 side, we have been also onboarded in starting of this year, and we did use the resources which have been provided by the CVE community, the mind map, and the various clients which are available. That's definitely a good tool for us debugging if we found the format is not correct as per the API. that's one of the roadblock also we have encountered in our publishing story sometimes, when some of the fields does not match with the criteria. And the error message, it's kind of like hard for us sometimes to debug like what exactly it's complaining about. So at those time, tools like Vulnogram and other CV clients comes as handy for us to find exactly what's missing or what can be improved. So the learning we are taking from here is to have some kind of like validations we can build before that, so we do not encounter these issues on the day we intend to publish, but we can catch them beforehand. So that's something we are investing next.
We definitely use Vulnogram and CVE Live both in developing our tools. Saves a lot of time to not reinvent the wheel. I mean, we could have developed from scratch, but having like the CVE Live for communications, with the API, and having Vulnogram as a tool to use, especially like I said, for validation, and also to use in the to use as another tool when just doing quick work with services. If you just want to like do a quick update to something or check a record, definitely is a very useful tool to use. I would encourage any CNA, especially smaller CNAs who don't necessarily have the resources or the need to develop their whole tool chain internally. I mean, you get to a certain size, you're not developing your own tool chains internally to be able to deal with the stuff. But if smaller CNAs, I think Vulnogram is a fantastic tool to use as an internal. And you can use up your own internal instance of Vulnogram because then you can have everything in your local database and everything to use to talk. Or you can use the hosted instance that lives externally too, if you just want to do a one-off type thing.
Yeah, I think, Martin, you've been working on a lint tool, which we actually are looking at your source code and thinking about it is open source, right?
Of course.
Because as you know, the way we work is that we have to publish, say 60 to 80 to 100 CVEs all in one go on Patch Tuesday morning, and there's no really great way. I mean, we can't use the testing instance because those CVE IDs are secret, right up until 10 o'clock on Tuesday morning. And so we kind of debug on the fly on Patch Tuesday, which is difficult. So we're really interested in getting a lint tool. Can you tell us a little bit about your work there, Martin?
Yeah, I think this is the next challenge of the entire CVE record topic, which is not just submitting CVE records that meet the requirements of the JSON schema, but submitting records that actually contain data that is usable by downstream tools and that have a certain quality requirements around them. So, for example, if you're publishing a CVE record, it should always identify at least one affected component in the product. Otherwise, what is affected if it's a CVE ID that tracks a vulnerability? This is something that is very difficult to encode in the JSON schema because that only checks the validity of individual fields and their values. So I took some time to write one tool to just pick a random couple of rules that I could think of to check for the quality of each record that is currently available in the CPU List V5 repository. That's a nice collection of everything so that you can also just check everything locally without having to query the API. And even with just the limited rules that I could come up with, there's several places and several records that could be improved based on the findings that the tool just shows you. So if you have any other ideas of what else a CVE record could contain or what the linting tool should check in a CVE record to improve the quality, file an issue.
Does anybody on the call want to share a story or raise a complaint about things? I know for us the error messages coming out are really, really cryptic and hard to, you really have to puzzle through and try to figure out what happened there. So is there anyone outside that wants to, I'm not outside, in the call that wants to share? Just raise your hand. And if not, that's okay too. But are people finding that there are any stumbling blocks that you can't get around? And are people figuring out how to reach out to the community for help? Let's do a Chris Levendis and do a raise your hand feature. So why don't you in Teams raise your hand if you've used either IDR or Arsus. There's 153 people on the call, so I'm hoping to see some hands raised.
I see 3, 4, 5. Hey, we're getting there. It'll be great to get over 100. That's a great question, Lisa, right? What is the community's experience with services so far, their automation and integrating with services, et cetera? And one of the things that's been recently set up is a GitHub page for mentioning things you want in the future, a features page. And so maybe Chris Britton could provide us the link to that in the chat, where people can recommend improvements for the future of CVE services infrastructure. Hey, we're getting a few hands up there. People have been using the systems. That's great.
So maybe I can say something from Siemens. We have integrated the CVE services in our automation. And actually, I've never talked with it with the command line, but only within with kind of our automation and scripts and pipelines. And the number of errors I get is really, really small. So it's very stable. I'm really happy with it. But I have one due request that's not even from the perspective of the coding or of the implementation side, but more on the vulnerability handling side, because we as Siemens have a lot of products that use third-party libraries that are affected by CVE. So we would really love to be able to be also not only as a CNA container provider, but also an ADP container provider to add basically the Siemens products that are affected by third-party vulnerabilities, so that we can also put that part of the advisories that we are publishing back into the CVE system. And because right now that information basically drops to the floor, it gets published as a PDF, but not back into your system.
Yeah, I know there have been, I think that's a separate discussion from this panel, but I know there have been on working groups that I'm on discussions about that. As a CNA who does the same thing as from F5, we've raised the same issue that we publish a lot of third-party CVE advisories for CVE third-party code that is, we use open source code and such in our products. We feel the same way. We would love to be able to provide, we publish advisories and they don't go back into the CVE corpus because there's no current way to do that. There have been discussions, I know, within the CVE organization about CVE CNAs as ADPs, but I think right now the ADP program is crawling, before it walks and before it runs. So I think maybe down the road that might be a thing. But I'll leave that to the CVE, to somebody else to address it at some point.
Thank you for that feedback.
Sure.
Yeah, I see this next year or so with, the emergence of SBOM and VEX and CVSS 4.0 as pretty significant in trying to figure out how we're all going to deal with the open source world, and our CVEs are all meshing at this point, right?
Yeah.
I see a hand up and another question in chat. Is that John? You have your hand up? Was that just for saying you use the system, or did you have something you want to ask or add? Nope, hands down.
Sorry, yeah, I was raising my hand. Sorry about that.
That's great. That's great. Somebody asked Dinesh asked a very basic question to all the folks who are doing it, development or integration. What languages are you using, Python or whatever, to automate your CVE creation?
I can chime in first. Yes. So at Microsoft, we use C# and to create the automation tools for CVE services. And to dive into more in depth for the architecture, we use Azure Functions to run these automations.
Yeah, I believe both of our work is being done in Python.
What
Excellent.
about you,
Thanks.
Martin? What do you guys
Sorry,
use?
was that a-
Yeah.
Oh, Python. Yeah, our
Python.
entire stack is also in Python. All of our services use Python, and also Django as like the front end to them.
Cool. Are there any other questions out there about JSON 5 or anything else before we wrap up for lunch? Of course, it's breakfast time here in Seattle, so.
Maybe I also have a question for the community, since I saw it mentioned already a couple times. So is there anyone in the community that is doing anything with VEX and CVE v5? Because the data formats are a little bit similar, and I'm curious if anybody is exploring some sort of a transformation function from one to the other, or some sort of a unified approach to producing both at the same time. MZ, you have your hand up.
We're just starting to look at that. I mean, I think probably with a lot of vendors, right, larger vendors like us, and I'm sure other people on this conference panel, SBOM is becoming a requirement. Any of us who sell to government, so we're just starting to produce SBOMs and going hand in hand with that. We're looking at VEX. We're starting to look at how we're generating VEX, and so we haven't started just yet. We have SBOMs. We're dealing with SBOMs already, but we are looking at the next step. Okay, now we have SBOMs, and the next step we have to look at is VEX, and so we're looking at that and we're already doing JSON 5, so we're looking like, okay, we're already generating this information, and VEX. There's a lot of, like you said, there's a lot of the Venn diagram here of a lot of overlap between different formats, and we also have, we don't currently do like CSAF, and we want to do CSAF because we've had customer demand for that too. And it's all the same information, or at least a Venn diagram of a lot of overlap between all these different formats between VEX, CSAF, JSON 5. And so we're trying to come up with a way to generate these things from our tool chain without duplicating a lot of work. And so, yes, we are doing a lot of investigative work in this right now. I don't know how soon we will have something, a working tool chain on that, but definitely we're trying to build the tools we're building today. We're trying to build the foundations there so that we can eventually add modules onto our tool chain to, putting JSON 5 out now, we want to have another branch where we can spit out CSAF. And we want to be able to eventually spit out maybe VEX, or, to do these things, because we don't want to have to build a whole nother tool chain to do these things. It doesn't make, sense from a development standpoint. So I would say keep that in mind if you're developing tools internally. We've been keeping these things in mind as we architect things from the start. We say not just what's our short-term goal, but we know we have these other needs down the road. So when we build the foundations, we're trying to build foundations beefy enough to support more structure, so we don't have to jack the whole house up later and build new foundations underneath everything. Yep, so I think a hand went up.
Yes, looks like somebody has a question. Go ahead.
You're on mute.
Yep, you're muted.
Stevie?
Yeah, Stevie from Siemens. Yeah, thanks, you
Hi,
mentioned
Steve.
it. There are, hi Lisa, nice to meet you again. You mentioned there's an overlap between the different standards and formats, and especially mentioned VEX. I personally also have a concern. We discussed this with Lisa as well already regarding VEX, because it creates a new format. It's already on the way. Our thinking is more prioritize the way of publishing the CVSS base core for a vulnerability, because through that you can say what VEX is about to say if you're not affected. you can or could define appropriate parameters in the vector that ends up in a score of 0, which basically says it's 0. So our concern is that VEX is just another thing that adds to the complexity rather than developing an existing standard forward in that direction. This would also help, my colleague Tom previously mentioned, already to become an ADP to contribute in the supply chain. If you have the same issue, you have raised the same issue, if you're affected by something upstream in your product, which you want to tell your downstream consumers, which might have the same issue. So it's just a chain. So by defining the impact to your level where you are, that can deviate from the upstream. So in CVSS language, this is quite simple in a lot of cases. For example, you have a web server that has a denial of service, then the impact is high for availability. But if that web server you're using downstream in your product just for administrative purposes, then if the web server goes down, the device continues to function. So it's only a low impact. And you can create all these sort of definitions within an existing standard by applying this in a product or component specific way along the supply chain.
Yeah, I see. I've thought about this a lot, Stevie, since we've talked about it before. But I think that it's something for the whole industry to think about. I don't think we can just change horses right now.
This is not just a switch you implement and that's done. The point here is it can be done in an optional way. If you don't do it, nothing changes. But if you add that information, you have value add without disturbing the whole interfaces and the whole formats. But VEX is disruptive in some case, in some sense, because it creates a new format, a new interface that basically conflicts with an already existing, in my point of view. And that's the point.
So before
just
we go,
ideas, it's not major thoughts, of course, but I would recommend to think more in that direction. Yeah.
The nice things about standards is there's so many to choose from.
Pardon?
I said the nice thing about standards is there's so many to choose from.
Yeah.
So can we real quick before we wrap up? A few people have said in the chat that they want to know, they want your opinions on Martin and Vishal and MegaZone about what are the top 3 traps in the JSON schema. So I would say, I don't know. I mean, one thing we've been tripped up on is the CPE value, right? We're adding CPE values to the JSON schema, and you got to get those devils right. You have to have 12 colons, or else it doesn't work. Also, the CVSS moving. We're going to talk about this more later, but CVSS is very structured, the way you define which version, 3 or 3.1 or 4, and we've been tripped up on that. What are some other things, MegaZone?
One of the biggest adjustments, I think, if you're using 4 and going to 5, I think for us, one of the biggest learning curves was specifying the way version ranges were specified really changed between 4 and 5. And it took some getting used to and figuring out what worked best. Like we use Semvar for most of our products, and how, like, now it's fluid. Like it's almost like in hindsight, it's like, of course, this is obvious now with 5. But when like getting your brain to switch into the new encoding methods in 5, like we were used to 4 and how 4 encoded versions, and then you look at 5 and you're like, it used to be you specified like your family, and then you had the starting version, you had the ending version, and all, and that it's all different in 5. And so it took a little bit. So that was a bit of a hitch, and we had like a little bit of trial and error period of how do we encode our versions now? And once we got our heads around the encoding versions in 5, now it's like, oh, it's obvious, but hindsight's always obvious. So I think that was our biggest hiccup with going to 5 was learning the new way of encoding things. Even though I had worked on it, like until once you start using it, it's like, oh, I didn't understand it as well as I thought I did. But like you said, a lot of it's data formatting, making sure everything's encoded just right, because then you go to validate something and it's like, it didn't pass validation. Why didn't it pass validation? It's like, oh, there was a missing something somewhere or something. But I don't know if there's anything particular in the schema other than just making sure your data is in the right format and everything's good.
Any final thoughts, anybody?
I'll let somebody else talk first since I just talked. Martin or Vishal, you got anything?
So I think the point that we want to get across is that this is a community effort and we're all learning. And so feel free to reach out to your fellow CNAs to ask questions and get help, because I think we all, we're all on this learning curve together, and everybody pretty much, I found, is friendly and happy to help.
Yeah, I want to echo that and also point out there is the CNA CWG, the CNA Coordination Working Group, or which meets regularly, and it's open to all CNAs. And there's also, especially for new CNAs, there is a CNA mentor program that is run through that working group. So if you're looking for a more official mentor relationship to help you get started, go through that working group, and Todd, who's the head of that working group, will help hook you up with a mentor and help you get started. And I've part of that program myself as a mentor, and also the whole program, right? This program is run by the community. So if there's a working group, all the working groups are made up by mentors. If you're interested in automation, you're interested in JSON 5 or the next generation, the quality working group, join a working group. That's how we're all CNAs, we're all members of the community who also happen to participate in these working groups.
I'll echo the same. It would be awesome if we had more people like showcase their tooling and talk about their problems in the automation work group. Oftentimes it feels like it's the program that determines like how the tool should work, but it's really given to the community, and the community should come to that automation work group to demand like, this is how we think it should be run.
Yeah, and then I will say, the people sometimes say things like, oh, they're dictating how things are done. Well, the program is the community. It's just that it's the same 10 people who are always in the working group. So if you wanted to have a voice, it's open door. You can join the working group, but it's join and have a voice. And they often, people who are in the working group meetings, it's open. I mean, Chris, who just spoke, he runs a very open meeting, asks very openly, asks for feedback and asks people to vote and asks people for input. But if you're not there and you don't provide your input, you're not there and you don't provide your input. So that's just how it works. So it's very much open. So I encourage people to be active participants and help the program grow, especially if you want to see change.
Excellent. We don't have any other questions in chat. Lisa, anything you wanted to say to wrap up?
No, I think MegaZone said it just perfectly. Come join us. We're having fun.